Yeah, yeah. So how long have you been working for Bombs? Oh. So how long did you do HR?
Fortunately, we were being part of a big company we get recruiters, but they struggle.
So as a journalist, because I have my only function is recruiting. So I have done ER benefits. Did you have as a journalist? Did you have one focus, or did you really do everything?
Right? So, and that's just it's just what about the people? Like it's fun. We do a lot of
All right, everyone. So it's 3:45. I want to make sure we get everyone out here on time to go enjoy your evening. So I figure we should get started. First of all, how's everyone feeling? I know it's been a long day, a lot of good content. How are we doing energy-wise? Good? Medium? Some woos, which is good. Okay, some of this, which is cool. All right, so I recognize a couple of familiar faces from this morning, and I want to welcome you back to my second session of the day. We're going to be doing a totally different topic, which is obviously tools and skills for more effective interviewing. My name's Dave Collins, and I'm the founder and CEO of Oak & Reeds, where we have a company where we do interactive skill buildings. So we cover a whole bunch of different types of soft skill building for our clients. We do interactive workshops on things from collaboration skills to public speaking to team communication. We do storytelling like we did this morning. We also do a lot of work with companies on interview skills, and specifically around training teams and training individuals, both individual contributors and hiring managers, how to conduct more effective interviews. So you're all here today to learn about interviews, and I'm curious, by a show of hands, who here conducts interviews on a regular basis as part of your job? Yeah, okay, a lot of you, great. Who here works with teams to help them prepare or set up interviews or interview processes? Great. So what I'm going to introduce today is it's a small sample, it's a condensed version of a training that I typically do with clients where I work with individual contributors and hiring manager on how to plan and execute more structured, more effective interviews. All right, so hopefully some of these tools are things that you can take back to your teams and potentially apply them right away. At least that's my goal for today. I'm going to give you the slides at the end. You can download them from my website if you want to share them with your team. So that's more than happy to talk with you more about that afterwards. All right, so let's get on with it, right? We have tons to cover today about interviewing. Some of my clients, some of you saw this morning, I work with a lot of different clients in a lot of different industries. What I want to stress with this slide is with interviews, these techniques that we're going to talk about today are useful regardless of who you're interviewing or which industry you're in. We're going to focus mainly on behavioral interviewing, but even if you are working with engineers or technical talent, a lot of these techniques will still be helpful as you plan and execute structured interviews for your teams, right? So we got 3 objectives today, all right? 3 things we want to get done, 3 things I want to impart to you to make sure this is a successful session. First, we're going to talk about values, because I think this is a big miss for a lot of folks. And when we talk about interviewing, we almost always focus on, do they have the skills, do they have the competencies, do they have the attributes to do well in the role? But a lot of times we leave this idea of, do they work in an alignment with our values? We leave that to happenstance, and we don't think about critical ways we can evaluate how a person works and what their working values are, and if they match up to the values of our company. All right, so we're going to talk about that first. I think that filters into a lot of what we can do to improve our interviews. Next, we're going to talk about unconscious bias. And this is really an important topic when it comes to interviewing, because interviewing is a terrific, and I say terrific in quotes, it's a very powerful way to introduce bias into your hiring process, and that's a bad thing, right? We're not going to have enough time to really dive into unconscious bias as a topic as a whole, because that's worthy, honestly, of a multi-day session. I'd encourage you to go there's other resources I can share with you afterwards to help you examine and help your teams examine unconscious bias. But today we're just going to make the link to how bias can show up in interviews and what we can do to reduce its impact. And the third thing is a tool that I've created that helps people plan the questions they'll ask in an interview. And it's a kind of tool that you can use and reuse anytime you're interviewing for a particular role. And it's a clear-cut way for you and your teams to get on the same page about what you're looking for in terms of attributes and which questions will give you clear, concise, objective information about whether or not a candidate has that attribute or can succeed in this particular part of a role. All right, it's a tool that you can use and reuse. It's pretty simple. We're going to actually practice using it at the end of this workshop. All right, does that sound good? That's what we're going to cover today. Yeah? Cool. Okay, I love the woos coming from over here. It's amazing. You usually don't get woos in interviewing workshops, so I love it. Let's get on with it then. Okay, so the first thing is values, company values. Who here works at a company where you have outlined explicitly what your corporate values are? Who here has company values? Right, many of us do, we all do. And the problem often is that we have these values about here's how we want to work with each other day to day, but when an interview comes up and a candidate comes in the room, we're not clear about what it sounds like when that candidate is describing their work, what we're listening for to know whether or not that candidate has the values that align with ours. It's kind of a tricky thing to look for. So in an interview, we're kind of trying to do two things simultaneously. We're trying to evaluate, does this person have the skills and attributes to do well in the role? Do they meet the success criteria? That's essential, right? We need to hire someone who's going to be a top performer. We also simultaneously need to be listening to how they describe the way they work right now and listening for examples and specific objective pieces of information that can illustrate that, yes, they are going to align with our values. So here's what that looks like. I'm working with a client right now, and one of their values is be yourself. I think it's a really helpful, interesting value. And the way they define it is live authentically and trust yourself. You belong here. Okay, so this is a value that they want everyone in their company to live by. This is how they want to work. They want people to feel comfortable working. They want people to feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and opinions, even if it may be contrary to their teammates, contrary to leadership. They want people to feel like they can be their authentic selves, which is a terrific value, right? So what I always like to ask them in an interview training is, what does this look like right now? When you are with your teammates, give me an example of some way, somehow, a person has lived this value in your day-to-day work, someone on your team. And it's often a great way to kind of call out people for working in interesting or cool or supportive ways. So from that, what we can do is say, okay, these are concrete examples of what this value looks like. It's not a hand-wavy thing. We've all agreed that this is what it looks like when someone is being yourself or being themselves, and that's good. We give that a stamp of approval. Now let's take that a step further. In an interview, what does it look like when a candidate is describing that value? And what I like to do is actually break it down even further, because I want to make it as simple as possible for someone when they're in an interview with a candidate to say, oh, that thing he or she just said, that is be yourself. That's an example. That's a concrete piece of evidence I can write in the notes and bring with me back to the debrief. So I've kind of broken it down here. There's self-awareness. Do they know themselves? Do they feel like they can describe what they are good at and what they are bad at? Do they have a realistic self-view? That is be yourself. But you also have red flags, right? Because you want to be listening for examples of them meeting a value and also them not meeting a value. So clearly articulating, what does this not look like? And what is an example of someone who doesn't live up to this value? So the same thing with self-awareness. You can have the reverse side, which is they don't have any self-understanding of what their strengths and weaknesses are. They can't name a weakness. Or they have an overly positive self-view. I don't know if you were in the previous training on interviewing for catching fraud. It was a great example where the person who ended up doing the fraud, he had this completely warped self-view of his strengths and weaknesses, which I would hopefully catch in an interview before he committed $150,000 worth of fraud. But the point is, you want to look for specific examples of that. Same with inclusion, right? Do they value a diverse set of thoughts and opinions? Versus the red flag there is they specifically looked for opinions or pieces of evidence just to validate their own thoughts, right? Obviously, some of these will be more or less common in an interview, but being really clear and concise and having these definitions is what's important, because a lot of times a value statement is a couple of nice sentences, and it doesn't really give you where the rubber hits the road when a candidate comes in and maybe doesn't even know your values. They're not going to make it easy for you to identify this stuff. So it's really important to get really clear about what a value looks like, what it sounds like, and what it doesn't sound like too. And so you may have this kind of matrix for 3 or 4 values, depending on how many your company has illustrated. All right.
What if you don't have any defined values like that?
Yeah.
You know, we have a mission, that's our
Sure.
values, but no one's ever sat down and said, this is the kind of candidate. Obviously, there needs to be a team meeting on defining values, but
Yeah, great.
as a recruiter, I can only go by the mission.
So I'll repeat the question for the group. So what if you don't have a value statement like this, or a 1-sentence description, or even details like this? What if you don't have that? And as a recruiter, you just have to go off the mission. So I think there's a couple ways you can do it. One, I mean, the first thing is try to figure out a way to get your values written down. I think you can't do it by yourself as a talent department or an HR department. This has to be a larger company strategy. And I think there's a lot of different ways you can go about writing mission and values. But you need it written down, and you need people to buy in, because unless there are people who are bought in and agreed on it, you're definitely not going to be able to go the level below and agree on what it sounds and looks like. So that's an encouragement. And I think if there's a reason you can argue that we need this value statement in order to hire more effectively. So you can kind of use that as a driver. Great question. Okay, so I told you that you needed to make friends with your neighbor because you may be talking to someone today. So what we're going to do right now is this is the one exercise I want to do, because anytime I teach a workshop, I like to have people actually practice the concept that I'm teaching, because what we're dealing with today, interviewing, it's a skill. It's a skill you gain through practice. So in order to do that, what I love for us to do is actually practice listening for values, because it's kind of an interesting thought exercise, an interesting exercise to do. Can you do it in real time when someone's describing some work that they're doing? All right, so this is an exercise. It's going to take about 7 minutes or so, and it's called 2-minute reflection. And I love this exercise. It's really, really effective, and I also love this picture too. So it's all about, do you see back what it is that you think you're describing? So here's how this works. You're going to find a partner, so someone's sitting right next to you. It could be anyone. And you're going to pick someone to be A and someone to be B. Doesn't matter who's who. You're both going to get to do both parts of this exercise. So A is going to start. And A, your job is to describe a challenge that you've recently overcome. Could be any challenge. It does not matter. It can be the smallest thing in the world, like you lost your keys and tried to find them, or it could be the biggest challenge in the world, like your company doesn't have a value statement and you're working on that. So either way, whatever it is, just think of something you can describe to someone in 2 minutes, roughly. Partner B, your job is simple. You just have to sit there and listen. Okay, you can take notes if you feel like doing that, that's fine. But you just sit and listen. You don't get to ask follow-ups. You don't get to propose solutions. You don't get to share your ideas. You don't get to empathize, which can be tough. You're just going to listen for 2 minutes. And after those 2 minutes, what you're going to do is share back 2 things. You're going to share back, what are the skills, what are the attributes that this person used to solve that challenge? What tools in their tool belt did they use? Was it their communication, their influencing, whatever it was? What skills did they use? And then what were the values they espoused, or what were the values that they showed in the way they approached that challenge, okay? And again, we're not one single company here, so you can think broadly about what types of values you may think of in your own work, all right? We don't have to apply them specifically to a set of 3 or 4, right? Just think broadly about what type of working values might be applicable in the way they approach that work, all right? Then we're gonna switch. So B, you'll share your challenge, A, you'll listen, and then finally, A will reflect back in 2 minutes what they heard from B's challenge. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? I'll call out time, so 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. And the whole point here is just about listening and reflecting. What can we get from the way someone describes their work? How can we pull values out of the way they describe their work? That's the whole point of this exercise. All right? So find your partner. In about 15 seconds, I'm going to start the clock for A to start talking about their challenge and B to start listening. Okay?
All right. You want to go first? Yeah? All right.
your challenge now. Start talking. Go Gates.
Come on, you got 2 minutes, girl. You got 2 minutes. That's it? That's it? Okay. Alright. Okay, from that I heard that you are goal oriented and that you're organized with it. You're structured in your time management. You know?
Okay, so that's 2 minutes. That's 2 minutes. So however far you got, that's okay. Even if you didn't get all the way through, that's fine. What we're going to do right now, we're going to move right into the second part. B, reflect back what you heard. Okay, reflect back the skills you heard that they used and the values they live by and the way they approach that challenge. All right? Give it a shot.
You see a need there, you know, and but also staying focused on you as a daughter. Maybe being the dad right now isn't going to be there, you know, but you need to focus on providing better life. Yeah? And you're persistent. You're persistent. And you're focused. All right.
We got the altruistic value.
Yes. All right, what else?
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, and yeah. I mean, shoot, you're here. You know what I mean? I mean, and you're here. You're here. I mean, you're just not too bad saying you need to go here. Pretty sure you're honest, right?
Yeah, I mean, I already had it scheduled to try it out.
Okay. Wait a second. Have they used to? Oh, okay. That's cool. So wait a second. Your company paid for your funding. No? Is this free? I didn't know that. I didn't even know about this thing. He's like, hey, there's this HR Star conference. And
Okay, that's 2 minutes. That's 2 minutes. So, we're just going to get right into the second half of the exercise. You're going to flip roles.
I'm working toward my
B, you were just reflecting. You're going to share your challenge. A, you're just going to listen. All right, so we're in the second half. So go for it. 2 minutes for B to share their challenge starting now.
So I think challenge. So I recruit for specifically for call center. So these are entry level positions, and I recruit for in LA. And one of the challenges has always been our background, and in particular our drug screening. And with the legalization of marijuana, that's presented some challenges. So when I'm doing my I interview with. And if I like a candidate, I'm always sure to go over our background process. You know, and I'm thorough with them. I go over everything except the criminal because we can't ask that. You know, so I go over our education and the employment piece, but I do emphasize the work, and I let them know that you know, although it's legal in California, it's still illegal federally. It falls out of our company guidelines as well as do all other recreational drugs. And I ask them, do you have any concerns? And I do that for a couple of reasons. You know, one, because at that point I like them and I feel that they can do the job. And if they were to test positive on one of our backgrounds, our company's policy is that if you fail a background, then we can't look at you for any position for a calendar year. That's the policy. But in all honesty, if I see that someone's failed at any point, I'm probably not going to look at it because I don't want to waste it. So I try to save.
Okay, that's 2 minutes. So finish up your challenge. We're going to get to the last part where A, you're going to reflect back what you just heard from these challenges, right? Last 2 minutes starting right now.
It's been minimal. We've had barely any since I've been doing it.
Okay, that's 2 minutes. So let's actually wrap that up and come back together as a group. We're going to talk about this. Thank your neighbor for participating. We'll come back together. All right, we've got a lot of reflecting to do, which is great. All right, so I want to share some thoughts about this exercise before we move on to our second objective.
Okay, I want to talk about
Okay. We got a chatty group here. I love it. Okay, so I want to get some feedback. How was that? How did that go for you? Was it good? Helpful? Yeah, we have some feedback. Yeah.
I found it a little interesting only because at the same time when you're trying to find the reflections, you're also, as a recruiter, trying to find the skill sets. So you're kind of doing two things at the same time.
Yeah.
And if you're not familiar with it, it can kind of be a little bit overwhelming only because in 2 minutes you're really trying to figure, is this person a culture fit and do they have the skill sets?
Right, so great, just to repeat kind of your key points, it's a little overwhelming to try to do both of these things simultaneously, which is exactly the point. And I think that's, in 2 minutes, obviously in an interview you probably have 30 minutes or so, but this exercise is designed to get you to practice using both of those listening muscles, essentially, at the same time, which is kind of what we're asking our interviewers to do. You have a thought in the back.
I do. We're all willing participants. The person sitting on the other side of the test that I'm interviewing is not willing to be that fourth time.
Oh, yeah. So, great point. Yeah. So, Yeah, the person sitting across from you in an interview this is not a tool for using with a candidate. Certainly not. Yeah, so this is a tool for thinking about it when you're getting your team of interviewers together, and a chance to think about how we listen for both of those two things simultaneously. And to kind of illustrate how it is difficult. It is a tough thing. That's why we practice it. That's why I like to get groups in workshops like this to practice it and get a sense of, yeah, this is tough, this is hard, but it's something we can get better at. It's something we can get better at by reflecting on the reflecting exercise. That's a terrible word choice. But by thinking about what we can do to make our jobs easier. And it's by making the things we're listening for more and more specific so that our job is simpler. And that's essentially the point of this exercise, that if we don't have these things defined clearly, it's really tough to listen for broad ideas or broad understandings of skills, broad understandings of values. We have to define them specifically. So that's kind of the big key takeaway there. Also, I just really like this exercise as a way to just connect with someone as well. So you can use this anytime you're working with someone. You just kind of want to check in on what are they working on, what's going on. You can reflect back. It doesn't have to be skills and values. It can be other things too, but it's a great way to just check in and be seen. So just kind of setting that aside. So I want to keep moving because we only have 20 minutes left. So the next topic is around adding structure. Okay, structured interviewing. So we may have different understandings of structured interviewing, and what I'm going to propose today is this idea of structure on a scale, where some companies will do a structured interview where it's the exact same questions every single time, but you don't have to necessarily do that. What I would propose is that structured interviewing makes clear what we're interviewing for and making that very specific. So we know exactly what we're listening for in terms of our values, and exactly what we're listening for in terms of the skills and what this person should be able to do to be successful in that role. If we're really clear there, then what we can do is plan some questions, and plan some questions that we can use and reuse that'll add some structure, but not necessarily making it 100% the same every time. And the whole point of being really clear is so that we can get the best possible evidence as possible. And also the other thing what structure does is it reduces the chance of unconscious bias creeping into our evaluation process. So for the purpose of today, I'm going to define unconscious bias this way. Unconscious bias is the shortcuts our brain uses to make decisions quickly. And with this definition, unconscious bias is neither a good thing nor a bad thing. It's just a way our brains work. Our brains are making so many decisions for us all the time, so fast, we can't possibly be aware of all the processes going on in our brains. That's just human nature, right? The problem is when our brain is making decisions for us, and these decisions are being created or generated from background or experiences that we have that we aren't aware are influencing our decisions. And the problem there is within interviewing, there's a lot of processes and decision making going on in our brains that we're not conscious to, that we're not privy to. And the problem is that when we have limited information about a person, which is by definition what we're going to have in an interview, we're not going to know everything about a person. We can't ask them everything. So we're going to have a limited view on them. When we have a limited view on a person, we tend to map that person to people who we feel are similar, or people we've worked with previously that they remind us of. And that has huge ramifications, and it's really, really big problem. You think, okay, this is I've worked with a person from this school before, this person must also be an excellent SQL coder, right? Or it could be even more nefarious than that, right? So what we want to do is make sure that we're getting as much objective information as possible and not allowing kind of gut instincts to fill in the blanks for us. So there's some things that we can do within the interview context that can help reduce the role of bias when we have to go back at the end and decide, will this person work well in this role? So, a couple things we can do to reduce. During the interview, this is a really important one, reducing small talk. And this is really important. I always spend a lot of time on this one because it's essential. Because a lot of times people feel like, oh, I want to chat with this person, make them feel comfortable, I want to check in, see what they're about, get a feel for them. The problem here is that, one, you don't know whether you're making them comfortable or uncomfortable. And a lot of times it's more just to make yourself feel comfortable rather than making the candidate actually feel like they're in a good space, right? So you really don't know the effect you're having on the person. But two, and probably the more important one, is let's say you make a connection, right? Oh, what'd you do last weekend? Oh, I went skiing. Oh my gosh, I went skiing too. Where'd you go? Oh, I went there. I loved it. Wasn't the snow amazing? Right? So now we have this connection. It has nothing to do with the job. And throughout the rest of the interview, we're going to be biased towards giving them the benefit of the doubt. Now, in that case, maybe this person is a great person. Who knows? The problem is we're filling in those blanks positively because of this small talk that we've just had that doesn't give us information about can they do the job or will they do the job in a way that aligns with their values. Okay? And you can flip that on its head. You can get a negative perception of a person, and that'll color the rest of the interview as well. So if you can, say something like this. Hey, I would love to chat with you, but I have so much I want to know about you and so much I want to learn, lots of questions. I'd love it if we could just jump right in and start the interview, right? Something casual, doesn't have to be aggressive or rude, but you just start the interview, right? Rather than chit-chatting. I always have to spend a while on that one. The other ones are pretty straightforward, right? Focus on success criteria. As a team, you really want to define what you're looking for in this role. There's 4 to 5 to 6 things that a person must be able to do to succeed in the role. Know what those are, focus your questions on those. Really, really listen intently and ask follow-up questions. This is why I don't say asking the same 7 questions in every interview is really the best scenario. You want to give yourself the flexibility to ask a follow-up if they say something interesting, or say something weird, or say something new. Say, ooh, tell me more about that, right? Get to the bottom of it, because once they leave the room, you're not going to get a chance to figure out what it is that they meant. So you really have to be ready to ask follow-up questions. That's asking follow-up questions, whole other segment. We won't really have time for it today. After the interview is just as important as during. So after the interview, make sure you stick to the plan in your debrief, right? Focus everything on whether or not they meet the values and use the evidence you gather, objective, specific evidence. This person worked on this project with this type of team, and they were able to execute in this way. That's why I think they'll be able to do the same thing in this role. Not, I got a good feeling about it, right? Trying to get objective is what you want to coach people towards. And write that in your, whatever sort of ATS or applicant tracking system you have, Greenhouse, whatever it is, putting those in the notes. And put the notes in immediately. I can't stress this enough. If you can, for anyone after an interview, scope out 10 minutes right after that interview for the person to write notes, for you to write notes if you're the interviewer, because the longer you wait, the more your memory is going to mess with your notes, the harder it's going to be. What'll take 10 minutes right after the interview will take 30 minutes at the end of the day. It'll take an hour at the end of the week. So really try to do it right away. And don't talk to anyone on your team before you put your notes in, right? So don't let your thoughts get biased by other folks. And try not to bias their opinions. If they're about to meet with a person, you want to give them a chance to get a read on this person without your ideas clouding their objectivity. Cool? That makes sense? Kind of really simple things. Again, this isn't going to completely reduce bias in interviews, right? You need unconscious bias training for your companies. You need people to understand what each individual person has going on in their heads, because it's different for everyone here in this room, it's different for everyone at your company. But these are little things you can do that will reduce the role slightly in your evaluation. Okay, take a little while. All right, we're cruising through this. We have about 20 minutes left. The last part is, what do we actually ask people in an interview? So what I have here is kind of a simple thing where different types of questions, and we can plan out how we ask those questions that all lead towards a specific skill that we're trying to measure. So we're trying to keep it as straightforward as possible. The key here is that the type of question you ask determines the type of response you get. You are in control of the type of question you ask. You're in control of this interview. And the way you phrase things is going to steer the interview to a productive place or an unproductive place. That's the whole point of planning what questions you ask. So, to ask great questions, there are basically 3 things you can do. 1, first I want to define the different types of questions you can ask in an interview. So, there are behavioral questions. These are the classic, tell me about a time you did X kinds of questions. The whole idea being, the way someone's worked in the past is a great predictor of the way they'll work in the future. Totally straightforward. Second is situational. These are like hypothetical questions. Instead of asking about something they've done, you present a scenario and say, how would you approach this scenario? This is really effective if maybe their background isn't exactly like what they would be doing at your company. You can present a scenario that's very specific to the role and ask them to think through it. So you kind of get them really precisely on the type of work that they're doing. So behavioral is backwards looking, situational is forwards looking. Factual questions, these trip people up a lot. They're really simple. These are kind of check the box, yes, no questions, right? Do you have a degree, right? Do you have a certification? Do you have a college degree? Have you worked within a budget before? How large was your team? These are kind of things where there's a fact. It's a yes or no, or it's a fact. They're going to give you a piece of information. You're going to move on. And skill assessment questions is the last large category. These are things like coding tests, writing tests. If you give someone homework, you get them to actually do the work that they're going to be doing in front of you. And that's another way you can gauge whether or not they're going to be successful. And so all of these questions can be asked in different ways. And this is where we get into sort of the art of interviewing, where you can phrase a question, and the way you phrase it gives a different amount of freedom for the candidate to respond. So at the very top, you can ask a question in a really vague way, right? And if you ask a vague question, essentially what you're doing is letting the candidate be maximally creative in which types of answers or what pieces of evidence will fit and be a reasonable answer to the question. So I always like to say the most vague question in the world is like, so, what's going on?
What's going on?
Right? You can literally say anything, right? That's not a useful question. Tell me about yourself is another very vague question, but that's actually like, you're at least asking them about themselves, right? But typically, what you want to do is ask a little bit more of you want to close it down a little. So you want to spend most of your time in the open section, because way down at the bottom is a closed question. A closed question really only has a handful of potential responses. The most kind of closed question is a yes-no question, right? There's only two ways they can answer it, yes, no. The more you add criteria to your questions, the more closed it becomes, and the more you're steering the interview towards the specific topics that you want to cover, right? But you kind of want to have a balance. So you want to spend most of your time in the middle of an interview asking open questions. The idea here being you want to give them freedom to say the things they want to say, but you also want to remain in control so you can cover the topics you want to and not let them drone on and on about whatever they feel like might be the most flattering example, but isn't actually that applicable. Does that make sense? Kind of different phrasings there? Yeah, cool. And then the last part, this is just a checklist. Questions have to be useful. Right? It's pretty straightforward, but I always feel like I have to say it. They gotta be relevant to the role, relevant to the skills. They have to be objective, right? You have to basically give them an opportunity to give you evidence. That's really key. They have to be specific so they know what you're talking about. They have to be clear and flexible, because what I like to say is if they don't understand what you're asking, that's on you. But if they understand what you're asking and they give you a terrible answer, that's on them. So you should be ready to rephrase a question if they don't quite get it, so that you at least let them start in a position where they know what you're asking, but they may not have a great answer. That's more of their challenge. And finally, non-leading. These questions shouldn't have right answers. You don't want to ask someone, so, you like working in teams? Yeah, I like working in teams. Like, they're not going to tell you they don't like to collaborate, right? So give them an objective question that's non-leading, that doesn't have a clear, correct answer that you're looking for. It's just not a useful kind of question. Okay, I'm going to keep moving on. So I like graphs. I do a lot of work with engineers, and they love graphs. So I created this one to kind of give you a sense of, in an interview, from start to finish, how are you phrasing your questions? How might this look? So generally, you can kind of think of an interview starts where you ask some vague questions at the front. Tell me about yourself. Or you ask them, like, talk to me about some of the work that you're working on right now, or some of the projects that are most important. Start with some vague questions. Then you may ask a follow-up that's a little more closed. That's where everything kind of pops down like that. Spend most of your time asking open questions where you give them a little bit of creative freedom, but you're leading them from topic to topic. And then at the end, you finish up with some closed questions. In case you missed anything or something wasn't clear, you get to at least check some boxes at the end, and you can do that much more quickly because closed questions don't really give them as much time to wiggle around or as much time to, they're not as hard to answer because they're more kind of factual-based questions. Also, at the end is the time for them to ask questions. That's kind of after after the whole thing is done. Okay, so in the last 5 minutes, how do we put all this together? Right, so we've got these attributes, these skills we're looking for. We've got values we're looking for. So here's a little tool. So literally all you have to do is fill out this matrix, and this is your interview plan. So what you do for every attribute or skill you're trying to measure, let's say you have 4 to 5 skills, but in this role the candidate should be able to clearly communicate client needs to the internal product team. Let's say they're like a product manager, right? So at the top of this matrix, you just write that. What are we measuring with these questions? You write it. In this role, the candidate should be able to do blank. Then you have the different types of questions, and you have the different ways you can phrase them. And literally all you do is just fill in this matrix with different questions, phrased different ways, that you can bring in with you to the interview, so here are all the different ways I can ask questions that deal with this particular skill or attribute. And what's great about this, you only have to fill it out once. And you can fill it out as a team. If you have a question bank internally, I know a lot of companies do that, you can kind of map it right onto here. And what you kind of like to do, generally I coach people to do, is phrase something, put something in as an open question, then try to rephrase it up to a vague question, or what's a way you could make it a little bit more specific and ask a similar question but more closed. So you kind of have a different way to move up and down, or from topic to topic, or style to style, all written out in front of you. So let me show you, because I know this is kind of a lot, let me show you how this would work. Okay, so I have an example for you. So let's say we're interviewing for an engineering role. So I live in San Francisco, I'm based in San Francisco, everyone is an engineer. That's every head of talent, I need to interview engineers. So I always like to do an engineering role. And so if you look at this, the what you'll do section, this looks like a normal job description, a bunch of things. These are the skills that we're looking for this engineer to be able to do. So if you take a moment and read this, if you were to generate questions for this role, for an interview, and I just kind of popped that right on there, the matrix. So let's say we want to come up with an attribute. So an attribute, a sample attribute for this role, based on what we have here in the job description, is that they should be able to determine the priorities of projects, right? That's part of their role as an engineer. Pretty straightforward, right? In this role, the candidate should be able to determine priorities of projects. So we write that right at the top of the matrix, and then let's come up with some questions. Okay, so a factual question could be, have you ever used a Kanban board for prioritization? Yes, no, right? Pretty straightforward. So you can put that on there as an open factual question. A skill assessment question should, on the topic of, can they determine priorities of projects? If we're gonna try to get them to do the thing that they'll be doing in front of us, a skill assessment question would be, okay, given these 3 project descriptions, so you have 3 project descriptions, sample ones in front of you, given these 3 projects and impact statements, walk me through your prioritization process, right? So they actually do the thing in front of you. That's a skill assessment question. And a situational. So a sample for one of those, again, that's sort of creating a hypothetical. What that would be is, let's say you're running into an engineering manager that disagrees with your priority recommendations. How would you approach that conversation, right? So you create a scenario, and here, asking them to walk you through that. And then finally, a sample one for this engineer on this particular attribute for behavioral would be, okay, describe how you prioritize projects at your current company, right? So tell me how you do it right now. Again, previous work being an indicator of future work. So does that make sense? How we would just literally just fill out this matrix. It's pretty straightforward. And then what you can do is, as a team, you can say, all right, let's say for that behavioral one, that's an open question. Describe how you prioritize projects at your current company. How could we make that more closed? What can we do to narrow that down as a potential follow-up question? So you kind of add some criteria there, right? So describe how you prioritize your most important projects at your current company, or how do you prioritize projects on the back burner? Or when the CEO comes in and says you need to work on this project and it needs to be completed by the end of the quarter, what would you do? How have you dealt with that previously, right? So again, you're adding criteria, there's follow-up questions to get them to drill down a little bit more clearly. All right, so I'm just about out of time. I do want to leave a little bit of time for questions, but before we do that, I kind of want to go zoom out, because I kind of threw a lot at you right now. So the whole idea here is, starting at the top, we're listening for values, and we're listening for attributes in an interview. And if we define what those attributes are, what those skills are, we can then come up with questions that highlight exactly what we want to learn about a candidate. And we can ask the same ones over and over again by using this matrix as a plan. So the idea there being is we're getting really precise with what we're listening for. We're getting better at picking that information out when a candidate says it in an interview. And then we're repeating this process and keeping that structure so that we're comparing apples to apples at the end when we have a bunch of candidates because they've gone through a very similar process. So I'm going to pause there, see if there are any questions. We have a couple more minutes. Yeah, first hand I saw.
Do you come up with one of those matrix on every skill set that you're looking for, or just the generic, like the broad one?
So let's say for a particular role, right? A role may have 4 skills. I'd fill out 4.
Okay.
And then I do that, and then those 4 would be the same for every candidate that comes in the door.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, some may have fewer, some may have more, but roughly any given role may have like 3 to 6 real skills that you're looking for in that person. Great question. Yeah, any other thoughts? All right, well, it's 4:30. I'll stick around here. In closing, we covered a lot of tools today that you can use. And if you want these slides, what I encourage you to do, I have them available to download on my website. So just go to oakenreads.com/hrstar, put in your email, I'll send you a link to download all the slides. And if this is something you're curious to learn more about, I do these workshops at companies. So come talk to me, figure out a way to make your interviewing process really precise and really effective. So have a great day, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Thank you.
You live in Norwalk, right? You live in
Oh
Norwalk?
yeah, I definitely will. I know.
Thank you.
I have a former coworker.
Yeah,
She works
I appreciate it. I know
She
that
works in
you
HR.
get them to do, people do an exercise.
and I know she lives in the LA Long Beach area. So I have to assume that she wouldn't take a job that's too far.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming.
How old's your kid?
Cindy, nice to meet you.
She's 7. Okay. I ask because, just thinking about, I know that our HR department is growing as well, but I wonder if there can be
Before you get going, I just always forget to do that.